There's this scene in Yu Yu Hakusho during the Dark Tournament saga, and it has the arc's main villain Tagoro speaking with his sponsor, Sakio. And there's this really odd little exchange between the two, where Sakio offers Tagoro a drink and Tagoro replies,
"We've had a good arrangement, Sakio. May the tournament finish appropriately. If you don't mind, I will take a glass of orange juice over ice."
And I love this line. There's something so strange and memorable about it. It just seems like such an odd inclusion for a character who, up until this point, has been a stone-cold murder machine. And the fact that Tagoro would rather a glass of orange juice rather than the assumed alcohol that Sakio is offering seems nuanced in a way that is not usually afforded to villains in anime. And look, maybe I'm crazy, maybe it doesn't matter, but I really think there is something to this line. And I suspect I'm not the only one, as right now the clip of it on YouTube has nearly 60,000 views. But considering all the dramatic and shocking things Tagoro does throughout Yu Yu Hakusho, how is it that one tiny line has any bearing on his character overall? Can such a tiny detail really matter? Well, let's dig into that, and a lot more as we discuss what makes a villain feel real. Before we go on here, I want to just get specific about what we mean by a villain. Specifically, what we're going to be talking about is a typical narrative-driven villain as opposed to the force of nature style villain. See the fantastic extra credits video for more on that. A lot of this will cross over with the fundamentals of good character writing, but I just want to concentrate on villains for this video because it can feel like a lot of villains in anime tend to follow a very basic formula, and it's a shame when it drags down an otherwise great series. And with that in mind, let's begin. There isn't a single aspect of a story I enjoy more than a good villain. Maybe it's the way they look at society, don't like what they see, and try and change it. Maybe it's the insatiable drive so many of them show in pursuing their goals. Maybe it's just the simple chance to live vicariously through them with a level of abandon and disregard no hero could dream of. Or maybe it's just the catharsis in watching them eventually fall. Whatever it is, I've been obsessed with the ideas of watching bad guys do their thing ever since I saw Scar sing Be Prepared in his musical number in The Lion King. Even from a story point of view, antagonists have such a more interesting role than that of their heroic counterparts. Take even the word antagonist, which loosely translated from its Greek origin means the one who initiates change. In other words, villains are the ones who set the events of the story in motion, the ones who feel so strongly about something that they're willing to go outside the bounds of society and the law to create a change or imbalance in the world, one that can only be corrected by an opposing heroic force. Or, to put it a different way, villains act, heroes react. So, with this in mind, what exactly defines a good villain and what doesn't? I think the idea of villainy that's always appealed to me the most is the idea that the only thing separating heroes and villains is one very bad day or a couple of poor decisions. The simple idea that we're all cut from the same cloth and have to endure these same daily hardships. Or, as writer Ben Bova puts it, in the real world there are no villains. No one actually sets out to do evil. There are no villains cackling and rubbing their hands in glee as they contemplate their evil deeds. There are only people with problems struggling to solve them. I think the moment that a narrative villain fails in this regard is the moment that they lose us as an audience, and it's insane how much damage a weak villain can do to an otherwise good series. One of the most recent examples being Biba from Kabanari of the Iron Fortress. I'm going to be pretty harsh here, but one thing I want to point out is that I really like this show. Mumei's cool, Yukina's also cool. Each of the cast are given just enough attention as not to feel too tropey. It has some great action and is consistently gorgeous. And just because I criticize a show doesn't mean I don't like it. But there's a point to be made here. Mild spoilers for Kabanari incoming. I think what I like so much about the early episodes of Kabanari is how the cast are kind of a mishmash of different people from different classes and backgrounds, who are all just thrown together and forced to survive in this dumb world of samurai zombies and giant trains. Even though there isn't a great degree of character development, what is there I really enjoy, especially in episode 7, where the series slows down to the point where there is zero zombies or combat, and we're allowed just to spend some time getting to know the characters as they travel around a newly discovered village. It's fun watching them pair off and see different sides of each other. At this point, I didn't know where the show was going and I didn't really care, I was just enjoying the ride. But then, about 15 minutes in, this guy appears. The moment he stepped onto screen, it was like the entire rest of the series was laid out bare before me. Everything about him, from his imperial garb to his long flowing locks, harkened back to what felt like 1,000 other anime villains I'd seen before. I don't know when exactly the idea of long-haired, slightly effeminate, fancily dressed villains became so synonymous with anime, but whenever I see one, my instincts just scream, "Oh Christ, here we go again." And sometimes I'm wrong, and sometimes I'm not. My core issue with Biba as a character is that he's not a character, he's a plot device. His only purpose within the story is to give Ikuma a foil so that he can look more heroic, and any information we get about his character or backstory only goes so far as to justify his actions within the plot, as opposed to trying to build him up in someone who is anyway believable a person, with their own life or nuance. He's essentially the modern equivalent of a man in a top hat tying a girl to train tracks, which I guess is a little appropriate. And this is so disappointing because when faced with such a two-dimensional villain, it drags down every other character in the show, forcing Ikuma to go from shy, misunderstood, nuanced hero to just plain old hero, and Mume to go from Mume, who's fucking great, to your standard stock template damsel in distress. That's not to say he ruins the series. I think all in all, Kabanari's still a good time, but it is a shame because a great villain can do so much to elevate a series. Like, let's compare him with the fantastic Yoshikage Kira from Jojos Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable. In a lot of ways, Kira is an extremely unusual villain. For starters, he has no grand aspirations. He has no plans to change the world or raise his own status within society. Yoshikage Kira just wants a quiet life, and to go about his days as he sees fit, the only issue being that he has a certain fondness for murdering women and cutting off their hands, and then... Actually, I'm going to stop it there, it doesn't matter what he does after that. So yeah, he's about as irreprehensible as they come, and at first at least, he seems impossibly evil and inhuman. But as part 4 goes on, we begin to learn all these bizarre little details about Kira and his life. We know his favourite kind of sandwich, chicken katsu on freshly baked bread. We know that he likes a glass of warm milk before bed. We know that he likes to spend his lunches alone in the park, and that he gets along well with cats and has a disdain for dogs. And none of these details serve to make him any more dangerous or more of a threat to our heroes. So why do they matter? Well, these are the little touches that make him feel alive. These are the nuances that trick our brain into considering him as an actual living, breathing person, rather than just a cartoon villain. And without these touches, all you'd have is just another stand user waiting to be defeated by Josuke and the guys. I mean, he is a violent serial killer, but he's also someone who enjoys a pleasant walk on a sunny day, someone trying to live his life the way he wants, without judgment, scorn, or interference from others. And that in itself is something I think everyone can relate to, at least when you take the murder part out. And it's the little details about him as a character that let us view him in this light. And it all comes together to make him feel real and tangible. He's not a speed bump in the plot to overcome, he's an actual character with thoughts, emotions, and drives. This makes him feel compelling in his own right, but also makes him feel like a far less predictable, much more tangible threat to our heroes and the town of Morioh. And is also a great example of a villain who is not sympathetic, but is relatable. So, for me, the main aspect separating a villain like Kira and one like Biba is nuance. Kira feels human, Biba does not. And working up this side of his character would have probably done a lot to make him feel like a more interesting villain. Like, take even Griffith from Berserk. Biba and Griffith are arguably pretty similar in a lot of ways, but one of the things that makes Griffith's later actions so much more shocking is the writing that's been put into him up until this point. Yes, he's a great warrior and a charismatic leader, but he's also kind of a goof who gets into water fights and laughs like an idiot. And moments like these make his later actions feel all the more shocking and abhorrent. You could argue that both Kira and Griffith have a lot more screen time than Biba and therefore more time to be given nuance and become relatable, and on that I'd also have to disagree, purely by virtue is that if you're clever enough, you can make a villain relatable in a very short amount of time. Like, let's take a look at Kevin Spacey's character, the John Doe serial killer from the movie Seven. He doesn't appear till much later on in the film, but then we get this scene where the two detectives are driving him to the supposed location of the final victim's body, and during the 138 seconds it takes the scene to play out, something kind of incredible happens. And that is, he gets you to this point where it's like you get it. You understand him as a person. Like, you don't agree with him, but the sheer conviction with which he voices his disdain for society is so convincing that just for a moment, it nearly seems to make sense. You see his logic in why he commits the atrocities he does, and understanding him like this is chilling. It makes the scene equally disturbing and memorable, because just for a second, there's a connection between you and him. And this, to me, is the most powerful thing a story can do with a villain. Not make them feel threatening, not make them feel sympathetic, but make them feel relatable. I'm going to link a clip of this scene in the description, but Seven's a great movie, and if you haven't seen it, you should totally go check it out. Once you start looking at villains in this way, it's crazy how cartoonishly insane you can make them, and still have them believable once you root their character in enough grounding and nuance. Take Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door's depiction of Bowser, for example. It actually writes the King of Koopas as a likeable and believable person, by highlighting that his constant kidnapping of Princess Peach stems from his own loneliness. Or another great example, Senator Armstrong from Metal Gear Solid Rising Revengeance. This is quite possibly the most ridiculous final boss I have ever seen in a video game, but there's something so doggedly convincing about his love for American football, his sheer desperate patriotism, and his very particular and genuine disdain for the conventions of modern America, that you do end up just kind of believing that he's a real character, even if no one this insane could ever actually rise that high in politics. Hey, wait a minute! Lastly, the point I'm quite possibly overlaboring here is that when you look at villains just as an object for the hero to overcome, you lose out on what a great villain can be, a wonderfully nuanced and complicated piece of the story, with all the depth and quite possibly more than that of their heroic counterparts. And this is why I get so excited when a muscle-bound weirdo in a dumb coat asks for a glass of orange juice. It's the first time in the series that Toguro expresses any sentiment that isn't directly related to punching a hole in another living being, and letting this tiny, seemingly insignificant fragment of humanity shown him is the point in the series when he goes from cliched villain in sunglasses to an actual believable person, and foreshadows the human side of him that's going to be revealed later on in the story, which results in one of my personal favourite and most compelling villain arcs in all of shonen anime. But that is a story for another video. Friends, that's gonna do it. If you want to see some shows with some great villains, then check out any of the series on screen. Or if you'd like to recommend me any of your own, please let me know down in the comments, or give me a shout over on Twitter at iPatchWolf. I will of course be back soon with another video, but until then you can catch me on the Let's Fight a Boss video game podcast, where this week we'll be talking about Watch Dogs 2, the X-Men anime, and My Hero Academia. Friends, as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.